Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Boogie Board Tiki Bar. Today, I am delighted to be joined by Alex Miller. He's the Director of Revenue Operations for Medallion. He lives near Tahoe and is thinking that this might be his first weekend of ski season. So, Alex, I would imagine you're feeling good.
Yeah, feeling great. Weather's dropping, get some precipitation, feeling good.
So, you were in the city for a while and then moved out near Tahoe. Was that particularly for skiing? Just get out of the city? What was the impetus?
Yeah, my wife and I, at least I had been in the same apartment in San Francisco for 12 years in the marina. It's a great time. We have a dog now, so we have a 3-year-old lab, small apartment, 2 people working remote, and we like to ski. So it was just a matter of, we liked to stay in the area. So kind of gravitating up in the northern Sacramento area was a pretty natural move for us. And yeah, a little more space up here. We miss the city sometimes, got much better food down there, but we're enjoying it up here too.
Good for you. Good for you. I'm glad it's working out. But you're from Chicago, if I remember correctly. So if I'm talking to Alex Miller, 10-year-old in Chicago, you don't know that you want to be a director of RevOps yet because you don't know that that exists, presumably. What did you want to be when you were a kid?
Yeah, when I was a kid, I was dead set I wanted to be a doctor. I always played sports. I was a lacrosse player, so like let's just say I had my share of injuries where doctors were the heroes. My mom blew out both of her ACLs skiing, so I got to see a lot of stuff firsthand of just like when doctors do what they do best. It's a life changing experience. So and yeah, like I growing up back in Chicago, you're right. Startups, RevOps didn't exist as far as I was concerned. So a lot of my eyes were open when I came out to the West Coast to go to school. So that was my first foray into, oh wow, there's much bigger world out here than just what's going on.
What pushed you to come out to the West Coast for school?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's funny. I applied to, I think, 11 schools. I got into a handful of those, but 10 of them were on the East Coast and one was on the West Coast. I was a lacrosse player, so I was looking at going playing in college and had the unique opportunity to actually play club lacrosse at Santa Clara University. I came out and visited the campus. My cousin was actually already enrolled there, and my other cousin was actually at law school, so I had some family out there already and saw the campus and you might as well have been on a Four Seasons resort. So coming from a kid in Chicago where this was in February, I think, when it was foot of snow on the ground, and I'm like, all right, yeah, I could do this. My mom's from Southern California too, so like I've always had kind of a gravitation towards the West Coast. And I remember when I told her I was going to go to Santa Clara, I think she was like, "That's the greatest news I've ever heard," aside from when we heard you were being born. So it was a fun opportunity for them to come visit all the time, which is great.
Yeah, I went to the University of Wisconsin, and I remember
Yeah.
visiting friends at the Arizona State, and then I went and toured Stanford's campus, and both of them were on like the nicest days, and I saw that kids had access to pools in college, which was just like I was like, what am I doing? I'm here just trekking through the doldrums of the snow. I loved the University of Wisconsin, but like there's just
I'll
once you
never
get out
forget
there.
like my freshman year at Santa Clara. When you grow up in the Midwest, you just are anticipating, right, the snow is going to come, the cold's going to come. And then when all of a sudden it doesn't come and it starts getting warmer again, you're like, what just happened? Like that was the winter time. And like, I could get used to this all of a sudden. And 15 years later, here I am still out here. So easy enough.
So something about it worked. So you go to college, you're playing club lacrosse, you're getting used to the West Coast. It looks like you started your career as an SDR at Yammer. Tell me the story of how you ended up at Yammer.
Yeah, this is a fascinating story. So when I was a sophomore, actually sophomore, junior, and senior in college, I actually coached lacrosse as well. So I coached sixth graders, seventh grade, eighth graders in town called Los Altos. And my job as a player on the Santa Clara team, I recruited all the underclassmen to come coach with me. So like there's a guy who kind of like was responsible for hiring all the coaches on this particular youth program, and he happened to be a venture capitalist. So I kind of did his job for him by recruiting a bunch of coaches to come coach with me, and I drive them all. So I had a coach of 7 guys who'd be driving to practice 2 days a week. And when I was a senior, I asked him, I was like, "Hey, I want to do what you do. I want to be a venture capitalist." And he's like, "No, that's a terrible idea." He's like, in a lacrosse analogy, he's like, "We're the old guys sitting in the bleachers." He's like, "You want to be on the field. You want to be where the action's at." And he's like, "There's 2 ways that you can get into a startup, which is being on the West Coast now." And my eyes opened up to that. And he's like, "Well, you're not an engineer, so you probably got one other path, and it's through sales." Initially I was like, "Oh, do I really want to do a sales job?" Yeah, I kind of did like some, doorbell ringing internships, if you will, like during high school, college, and it was just not really. It wasn't something I was overly excited about, but I was really excited about the opportunity to work at a startup and just see like this is this is cool. Like again, coming out of Chicago where, in the 90s and early 2000s, these just didn't exist, at least at the same scale you see on the West Coast. He sat me down. He's like, hey, here's our portfolio. Like, if you're interested, take a look at what's in here, do a lot of research on these companies. And he's like, Alex, I can't walk you through doors, but I can help open some doors. And it's like a joke sometimes. It's like, sometimes it's not about what you study in college or what you do, what your degree is in. It's about who you know and how like you build relationships with people. So shout out to Matt Holleran. I think, he got me a nice interview at Yammer, and it was one of the harder interviews of my own career. It was, I got like the mock sales pitch and all that. And this is for an SDR job. But yeah, my first day, I think I graduated on a Saturday, started on Monday. I'll never forget too. It was I was studying for my last final exam. This would have been like a Wednesday or Thursday before graduation. I think I refreshed Business Insider on my laptop, and it was a big headline. It's like, rumor, Yammer to be acquired by Microsoft. And then all this just, I don't know, fear, doubt, what's going to happen set in. And nothing had really been announced yet until probably 2 weeks after that rumor broke. So I remember showing up on my first day at work, and everyone was like walking on eggshells, being like, well, what's happening? Like, do we work with Microsoft? Do we work at Yammer? Does Yammer still exist? Do we have jobs still? And obviously that kicked off a really fun series of events over the next 18 months as we moved into the Microsoft world, and I got exposed to startup world, big tech company world, kind of everything in between. Yeah, it was a pretty wild time, which was a lot of fun.
Absolutely. So you mentioned you did some doorbell ringing before becoming an SDR. Some people have trouble. When I started as a BDR as well, and I remember thinking like, okay, like, is this what I'm going to do now? Is it like cold call people? Like, what does that mean for my future? Did you have any of that trepidation, or had you already put that aside from?
I totally did. I think I rang doorbells selling solar. It was part of one of my, in college, I studied environmental science, and it was to study economics, and part of, I was doing the summer school course, and I was like, hey, I want to make some money. And it was, solar was a hot thing. It still is obviously today. And, I was like, all right, yeah, this is cool. It's Santa Clara based solar company, and they're looking for people that can help, drum up meetings. And it was ringing doorbells. I hated it. I actually, I think I quit it after 2 or 3 weeks, because it was just like the constant rejection and, people yelling at you, like, what are you selling? Why are you on my doorstep? And I definitely had some inkling of that when I moved into an SDR role at Yammer, but I think a lot of that was, it is a lot of the same, but it's also very different. It's like, hey, you're talking to people that are familiar with what you do. One of the kind of secret sauce of Yammer was, we essentially had an analytics team behind the scenes. Shout out to Derek Steer and the team at Mode. This is what they built in-house before they made it a company. It's called Mission Control, and it was like, hey, here's everything that's happening within all these different instances, if you will, or networks. And so a lot of the outbound we were doing was not like, hey, what do you want? Why are you ringing my doorbell type stuff? It's like, oh yeah, I happen to be curious about this, and I got to log in. And it was kind of maybe the first foray into obviously freemium, or, for some degree, you may even call it PLG type motion. So I think once you start having those conversations with people who actually like, oh yeah, actually I am curious to talk about this, I think a lot of that subsides pretty fast. And I think you get a lot of confidence when you get some of those wins early. And I definitely remember though, I think I still have, I take a lot of notes in Evernote, still do. I guess I'm like the last person on earth that still does. But the same instance I use today, the same account is the same account I use for all my SDR notes. So every now and then, 14 years later, I go back and look through. It's like, this was Alex's first notes way back in the day. I remember what my first opportunity I created was, and it was like a 3-person company in South America. I remember talking to the AE being like, Alex, what the hell is this? But, it's humbling. It's fun to look back at those notes and at those times, because I think it's a lot of grit and character building that comes out of doing those types of roles.
Absolutely. I remember the first deal I closed at NetSuite, and it was a 2-person company. And I remember wearing a suit to meet them. I'm sure it was not the right suit to be wearing for the occasion, but those memories just stick with you. Okay, so you're in sales, you're getting some confidence because things are starting to work. Yammer is a good place to learn. You're going through this acquisition, and then you ultimately make a leap into sales ops at another company. Yeah. Take me through what intrigued you about that and how you made that decision.
Yeah. Yammer, Microsoft in 2012 was a very different Microsoft, if you will, than what you see today. Steve Ballmer was still at the head. It was a different place. And I think a lot of people who were on that Yammer team were like, hey, you look yourself in the mirror and you're like, I'm not going to be working at Microsoft for the rest of my career. There are a lot of folks that are still there, and it's awesome for them, because I think Microsoft's a very different place today. But At the time, people were like, hey, like this was fun. We had an exit. It's time to go find what's next. And a lot of these kind of lifeboat companies started leaving Yammer with a lot of like executives and people say, hey, we're going to go run it back. I mentioned Mode. They were one of those companies, but I actually got tapped on the shoulder by Yammer's chief product officer, another guy named Brandy Marrone, who now is one of the leaders at Craft Ventures. This was, this is again 12 years ago, to say, hey, we're going to go kind of run it back and start this other company. If Yammer was Facebook for work in an oversimplified way, this next company, CoTap at the time was called, was the WhatsApp for work. And this was kind of when social networks had kind of become a norm, and now a lot of mobile messaging apps were kind of the next big thing. So it was kind of like, hey, we're a walled off version of WhatsApp for all of your work business, work chat type stuff. This is obviously before Slack and a lot of these others even existed. And they're like, we want you to come join us. They're like, we don't know what you're going to do, but we just know that like you're a generalist who can come in. And I mean, the reality of the world was like, you're going to come in and be a BDR, and you're going to answer the phones, and you're going to set up all the desks in our office for us. And it was really kind of opportunity that when you were on that team at Yammer, you're like, well, you've been selected to like have a seat on a lifeboat. Like you always take it. You got to go. So joined that company and I was there for about 3 years in total, but that was a fascinating role for me, mainly because I think I prospected every day for 3 years while I was there. I was also an AE, like closing a bunch of smaller deals as we continue to hire our sales team. I set up a lot of like the sales infrastructure. So that was one of the things we needed to go do, is like, hey, to go do this job, you have to go buy a Salesforce, a CRM. Like we ended up bringing in SalesLoft at the time, all of these different tools that essentially one needs to do their role, you need to go buy. And it's like, well, someone's got to set it up. So it was like, okay, well, we're a 10-person company. Like, who's going to do that? And it's like, oh, you look in the mirror. That's who's going to. So that was actually more of my, I guess, like formal pivot into sales operations. I think after prospecting every day for 2.5 years, I talked to Brian and I was like, hey, I want to keep doing this. The rejection's fine. I got a good handle on this, but it's also like, I looked around a lot of my peers from my team at Yammer who were SDRs, and they were off, as commercial AEs, closing big bucks and doing interesting things. But, I had a kind of interesting moment where I'm like, hey, like, do I want to be an AE, or do I want to like continue to kind of do this, what at the time was kind of just back office systems administration stuff. But, I kind of came to a real realization. It's like, hey, I really enjoy doing a lot of the kind of building the plumbing for sales orgs. And I think it was fascinating to go from, Yammer was about 450 employees when it got acquired. And I think even by today's startup standards, as far as like GTM structure, it was probably 1/10 of like what you'd see in a mature GTM org of the same size today. I mean, this is just rewind, 12, 14 years. It really was, here's your tech stack. It's like Salesforce. I think we had Marketo. It was like, we use Yesware, like that doesn't even hardly exist anymore. And then it was like, here's your email, here's your calendar, here's your phone. Like, that's it. Like, have at it. So, credit to Don Otvos. I know there was a lot of infrastructure to stand up, but it wasn't like this 20 deep, vendor tech stacks like you'd see today. So we had to see a lot of that, but then also see like how Microsoft worked, which is really like Microsoft literally manages their entire account database, at least at the time, off of a huge spreadsheet called the MAL, the MAL, the managed account list. And it was like, that was it. That was all their customers. And to do a lot of sales roles at Microsoft, your job was essentially to like go look for customers on this big spreadsheet, and then like don't override the old version of it, and save it back up to a SharePoint file. And like, here's all the customers, here's what they've ever purchased, and here's how now we go to market. I mean, you had your territories and all that. But, I kind of like got to see these different scales about like, here's a small agile company, here's a large company. There's probably inefficiencies on both ends of the spectrum, but I was really excited about the opportunity to go and be able to tackle like, let's go build one of these like ourselves. And it was kind of a unique situation, obviously, where like I was the primary user in addition to an architect. And eventually it came to a point where it's like, hey, you can't do both. So it's either like you're going to take the systems admin route and kind of move into a more sales operations type role, or, hey, we're going to be an account executive, and we're going to go hire someone else to do all the systems admin stuff. And I didn't think twice about it. Honestly, it was one of those things where it's like, hey, I get a knack for this. I had a fortunate manager, Jairaj Soundrajan, who at Yammer was actually a head of RevOps, who actually, in the Microsoft acquisition, kind of became a lot of the leader of a lot of Yammer post-acquisition. So I think a lot of the way our team operated, he brought a lot of like sales ops type ideas, or at least he was a good leader by example. At the time I was like, I want to be like Jairaj. I want to go do what he does. And so I had a lot of like good mentors early on, including Don Otvos, who, was like, hey, there's a good career here. It's a very early, pretty nascent role. And if you just jump in, like you'll build a lot of this stuff out. And that was also the time I did that role for about 3 years. So it was probably like late 2016, I got like a blind email from Pete Kazanji saying like, hey, we're doing a sales ops meetup in San Francisco. Come to it. Like it's in like this, random meeting space deep in Soma. And I was like, all right, why not? And it was actually one of the first modern sales pro salons. And looking at that, I went to that meeting and it's like, all right, these are my people all of a sudden. Like these are people that I can just sit at a table, and the guy to my right is from Uber. The guy to my left was like working at Airbnb or something. And they're all talking about the same topics that we at CoTap, a small company, same challenges we were working through. And I remember being like, wow, like we've actually tried stuff here that they haven't tried yet. And it was really fun to be able to share those ideas with like these blue chip companies and be like, wow, like I've actually got this experience. Like, I've actually got this kind of know-how, and the contributions I can make to this audience, even at this small little table of, 10 of us here is not zero. So that was kind of my galvanizing moment of saying, hey, like, this is where I want to spend the foreseeable time of my career. And, as you can see, like a lot of names dropping during this, it's all about like networking, getting amongst like smart peers so you can teach you things, and, finding kind of your tribe as it is. Like so much of startups are tribal, like the people you work with is bigger than the company you work for. And, I can say like I'm a good example of that looking back now, 12 plus years.
Absolutely. I love that story of being at one of the first meetups and kind of looking around and seeing folks that are like, okay, we're doing this together. So you're doing sales ops at startups, you're getting the knack of it, you're plugged into the community. At what point do you take on your first leadership role?
Yeah, great question. So when I actually left CoTap, I went to a kind of a funny move in retrospect to another actual CRM company called ProsperWorks. Now it's called Copper. And I was fascinated about going there mainly because it was a big sales team. It was like a really young, high energy sales team. It reminded me a lot of the team that was at Yammer. And I took on my first role. It was my first like outside role. So when I was interviewing for a sales operations manager job at ProsperWorks, I was kind of like, can I even go interview for like, was the job I was doing so unique to just CoTap, or can I actually go and get this type of role outside of the company? And I think a lot of it was, those modern sales pro salons and stuff were a good confidence booster there. But when I landed at ProsperWorks, I didn't come in to be a leader, but it was one of those things where my VP was like, hey, we have like this kind of analyst person over here who's like reporting to me. I'm just gonna have a report to you. And it was like in my first week, and I was like, okay, like that's cool. Let's see. Shout out to Caitlin Sharp, who probably had to deal with me learning how to be the ropes of a manager more than I actually managed her. But I think that was my first foray into saying like, all right, cool. It's not just me doing this job as kind of this, solo ops person. Now it's a team of two of us doing all the things for this team. And I think it's everyone kind of comes to that moment where it's like, hey, you can't do this yourself. Like you just can't. Like if you want to like draw all this stuff out for 6 months, sure, that's probably not much of an option for a lot of startups. But if you can like get the right team around you and like you could go together, all of a sudden now you have this like 1+1=3 type effect. So I was, kind of 24 at the time. So pretty early on, taking on my first management role. And I think a lot of RevOps folks, like, sure, you have people reporting to you, but that doesn't mean like you sit back and just delegate everything. Like, you still are in there doing a lot of work yourself. I mean, even to this day, I still am. But I think I've been a manager in every role ever since. So I think, like I said, didn't like practically go seek it, but it was one of those things where like once you're in it, like you embrace it. And yeah.
So both your RevOps start of your journey and your leadership start of your journey kind of happened by accident, but then you flip this switch into intentionality and say, okay, this is the next thing I'm gonna take it on. What was like an early challenge for you in leadership, or maybe a surprise that you didn't foresee as part of the gig?
Yeah, I had a role where I came in and there was kind of a new regime coming in, like a new CRO had just joined, and it was kind of this idea or process of, the team that had been there, are they staying? What's the perception from that existing team about what this new leader looks like? It's just the natural things that happen during any type of, call it changeover in leadership. And I'd say like one of my first real challenges was having someone who is not a good fit for the team or not like working really well as a team, and having to make, just some of the hard people management decisions to say, hey, like this isn't working. And I think it's a little different than, say, if you're a sales leader where you have, an IC who's just like not carrying their weight and like the results just aren't showing. And oftentimes in an operations role, it's like even if someone's not a good fit or whatever, they're still doing work. It's not like you can say, hey, we're going to cut this right here. And because like there's work that has to be absorbed back by the rest of the team. So there's always a hard decision to be make around like, Do we try to make something work here? Do we keep pushing on? Is there a path to get everything back to some normalcy? So yeah, I mean, I got hit with that when I was probably 25. It was my next role at Costworks, where you go through some of the challenging people management times. And I think when you're just fairly early in your career, you're like, man, like I've never even been able to hire someone yet, but now we've got to like try to work someone out of the company. You know, it's a learning experience that just comes with the territory of being a people manager. I'm very fortunate. I think that was the only time that's ever happened in my career so far. But I remember pretty early on, like sleepless nights, being like, man, like how am I going to make this work? Or how am I going to like the expectations that this is gonna happen? Like how do I make this happen? And I think like I said, having pretty early on in my career is it's not fun.
No,
So
no, it never is. And I'm going to fast forward a little bit because your career kind of reaches the point where I would say RevOps is more of the normal, but you were at it from an early age, and so you're riding this wave. And one of the companies that was clearly at that like kind of rocket ship inflection was Sedoso while you were there. And so I
yeah,
want to just understand like where you are at this point when you're at Sendoso. We talked about you as kind of this 24-year-old, 25-year-old figuring it out, starting to gain some confidence. Now take me to like you're in the big leagues, you're running a big team. Like what's different about you at this point?
yeah. Worth mentioning, like in my time at Sendoso, I joined in I think October of 2019. So there was a lot of just like, hey, we're in a new startup, not really knowing what was coming around the corner. Of course, with COVID rolling through in early 2020. When I got to Sendoso, I was the first ops hire. I think we had marketing ops was already there, but it was just kind of just me. And I think we had a small sales team at the time. It was probably 6 or 7 sellers. But it grew very fast. And I think that accelerated as we got into COVID times where I think the Sendoso product was very well positioned during those times to say, hey, if you're a marketer, you're not going to a trade show to generate a pipeline. You got to get creative and bring your trade show experience to people in their homes. And I think Sendoso was very opportunistically positioned to see a lot of benefit to a lot of orgs. And I think things just went vertical within the first 12 months we were there. So it became very clear that like when things are working like that, you start hiring a lot of people. But like the last role, unfortunately, that usually gets hired is like your ops team. So what happened there is like, we started growing the BDR org. We had an office in Phoenix. So the BDR org really took off, which made sense. It was like, hey, demand capture, let's go out there. We're still, we're getting a lot of inbound. We're also doing outbound. And therefore AE scaled a lot at the same rate. So a lot of let's say my first year there was figuring out like, what is the right ops structure to support these types of growing orgs as fast as they are. And, we ended up hiring like a BDR ops specific role. And I think, I guess to summarize, like the direction we went was dedicated ops persons supporting different functional leaders. So we have a BDR ops person reported to me, but supported our VP. I kind of filled in the role of sales operations. We had CS operations. Then we ended up bringing in like a systems manager to kind of look at, okay, the unifying thread across all these teams is our unified tech stack. So very quickly grew. But I remember, it wasn't the easiest thing to say, hey, you can hire one more AE or one more BDR, or you can make the very clear trade-off to say, let's hire one less AE, but then hire one more ops person. And I remember, that was the constant calculus that I was trying to keep up with internally, was making sure that we had the right staffing to be able to support the growth elsewhere in the company. I also do firmly believe that like, I think the best ops teams are like small and agile. So like, I don't want a 10-person ops team. Like I want like a really savvy group of call it 4 to 5, maybe 6 people who are generalist mindsets who can tackle different problems and be dangerous on a lot of fronts. Yeah, I think seeing the scale that came at Sendoso in a relatively compressed time frame was definitely, as I would say, like one of the galvanizing points of my career, just to say like you don't have the luxury of planning out like this is where we're going to go in 6 months. It was more like make decisions today to like stop bleeding or fix something and put ourselves in a position where we can continue to push the gas pedal at the company level to continue growing. So, a lot of fun, definitely like a lot of stressful times, but looking back at that, it was definitely one of the highlights of my career.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, there's a few products when you think of like COVID and it just ramping. I mean, I was working for Google Workspace at the time within Google in the Netherlands. And our like Meet usage of the Meet product, like obviously it wasn't Zoom, but it's for anybody who had our license. Like it was insane. I remember just working in my apartment in Amsterdam, like crazy hours. My wife was like, I thought this was COVID times. Everybody's supposed to be chilling. And I was like, no, this is like
during that same time, my wife worked at Gong. So like the two of us in our small 2-bedroom apartment, it was crazy times, but definitely like looking back on them, like they're fun.
Yeah, absolutely. So then what ultimately intrigued you about the opportunity to come to Medallion?
Yeah, great questions. I say fortunately or unfortunately, as fast as things went up during the Sendoso era, like they came back down to reality a bit, obviously in the later era. So after Sendoso, I was there for almost at a company called Mux for almost 2 years, which was another COVID opportunistic company. Mux was an API product for developers who work with video. So during
Mm-hmm.
the pandemic, a lot of folks were like, hey, we need to move our church servers or our yoga studio like over and stream it on the internet. Mux had a great, kind of precipitous climb during those times. And I think, when VC money kind of came to a little bit of a halt, like a lot of the inflow into those types of companies fell off. And I think things came back down to reality a little bit. And, great almost 2 year run there, but found myself out of work 2 summers ago in the summer of 2023. Funny enough, like right before I was getting married. So I got laid off as part of a riff right before getting married, which is always fun. But for the first time in my career, I'm thankful for Mux, great severance and all that, set us up for success and all that good stuff. But for the first time in my career, like had an opportunity to be like, cool, I don't feel like I need to sprint to another role. I can kind of take my time to figure out what I want. I mean, a lot of my calculus at the time was like, I'm just going to wait until after we get married in September and look for a job in November and just hang out, and just kind of see what happens. Life happens fast, and my wife and I actually signed a purchase contract on a house. It was like, right, I had a pre-approval for a loan conditional on making income happen again. So ended up hitting the ground running pretty fast in searching for a new role, kind of right after the riff. And, I kind of had a moment where I was like, okay, what do I want to do? Like, what kind of companies are interesting to me? I said I wanted to be a doctor. It was the beginning of this conversation, and so I've always been really fascinated in health tech companies. And I actually had a former Sendoso colleague who was an account executive at Medallion. And I remember, just pinged him because he'd been pinging me. He's like, man, we really need some help on the RevOps team here. Like, you should check it out. I'm like, well, I'm happy where I'm at, so I'm not really interested. Fast forward a couple months, I hit him up on that offer and had a couple of conversations with the Medallion team. And what really drew me into the company was two things. One, it's a durable space. Like, I think health tech could be challenging at times. It's not like, you can go crack open a lot of the, call it traditional B2B SaaS data enrichment providers, stuff like that. Like, it just doesn't, a lot of stuff that maybe works if you sell to marketers or to a technical audience don't necessarily work when you sell in healthcare. But what drew me in was actually like it being a durable industry. Like, we could be in the worst economy of all times and Medallion would still have a healthy business because of what we do. We do licensing and credentialing for physicians. So essentially background checks for doctors, and you have to have background checks to be able to practice and also to accept insurance money. So like it's a pretty critical part of how the US healthcare system works. Durable industry that, at least from my assessment, was like, can weather some pretty severe economic headwinds. But also it was a really young company. Like Derek, our CEO, like he founded the company, not even 4 years ago. So it was a lot of like, hey, here's an opportunity to come in. They'd seen a lot of early success and just help build a lot of stuff 0 to 1. I think sometimes you take RevOps roles, and nothing against these, but like you're, kind of retreading someone else's work versus laying the foundation, the tracks for the first time. So I was really excited to jump in. Been here now for a year and a half, and it's been awesome. I think I'm excited to continue growing our team, like continue supporting sales. I think you learn a lot in operating in like the sales cycles like we go through, where you're selling to, for lack of a better term, like very unsexy companies, but like this is a huge pain point problem and they have a lot of money to spend to fix it. And it's one of these things like I've never in my career seen like large deals on multi-year commitments come together in like 90 to 120 days. So it's just a fun cycle where like you get kind of the rapid feedback to continue to iterate. And obviously I learned that once I joined, but that's really what's keeping me fired up about what we're doing here. But yeah, I'm excited about like, sometimes I'm a little envious of peers outside of health tech and maybe how some things are a little bit easier there, but I'm really enjoying what we're doing here and it's been a lot of fun.
That makes a lot of sense. I'm glad to hear that. And so you've now seen a lot. You've been in a number of different startups, large companies, different size RevOps teams. And the whole time you've kind of been plugged into early RevOps communities. You're an advisor to companies in the space. I'm curious if there's a trend or something that you're hearing right now, or maybe these companies bring to you that has you put your head in your hands where you're like, no, that's not right. It's this. So is there something that you feel like is going on right now that you are having to either advise against or counsel against in any of the communities?
Yeah, I'd say a lot of more of the active advisory work that I do is more or less internal to our own teams. But, I think there's an idea that AI is going to like come take all of our jobs. It's just something that like, I don't think that the AI is going to replace the SDR anytime soon. I think there's still like I think there's a lot of folks out there, and no fault of theirs, sort of like, hey, I'm going to go lean on AI to like do half my job. And before you know it, like that half of your job you rely on AI for is actually like being done half as well as it probably was when you were putting yourself into it. I'm very bullish on AI as like a force multiplier and letting people spend time on like higher value activities. But I think, at least my opinion, of course, is my own of like, hey, AI is probably not there yet where it's going to go replace a lot of stuff you do today, which just means that like, hey, if you're going to go leverage some of these tools, like continue to push on it, continue to stay present. And, I'm a big proponent of like, again, bring these in to like take over, the 20, 30% of your tasks that are mundane and repetitive, but don't rely on it for any more than that. So,
Yeah.
yeah, a little bit of a weak answer, but I do think that at least right now, it's like, hey, be cautiously optimistic about what AI can do for us. It'll do a lot, but like you really have to, especially in ops where it's like, hey, your margin for error oftentimes is pretty slim. It's not like if you're a BDR and you send a bad email from AI, it's like, all right, you take the L and you move on to the next one. Like in RevOps, you oftentimes don't have that same.
Yeah, absolutely. And you'll hear it pretty quickly internally. So, okay. So you've got this really impressive journey through all sorts of different companies, through RevOps into senior leadership. I'm curious if someone hears this, maybe they're an SDR trying to figure out what's next for them, or maybe they're in college or they're just in the space and they think, wow, what a cool career. What advice would you give to someone who's just starting out?
Yeah, great question. I think the first thing is like you don't go to school to like go into RevOps. So everybody finds themselves into a RevOps path kind of either by accident or from like a very intentional, like, hey, there's an opportunity in front of me that kind of usually materializes randomly. And when you're in that moment to say, hey, this is something I'm interested in wanting to do it. But like my advice for anyone younger is like, especially for someone who, if you're, a BDR or like an SMBA or someone early in their career within a GTM org who has any fascination about what ops looks like, is go meet with your ops team. Like go talk to them. Like I can promise you, I have like a soft spot in my heart for like the BDR who knows what pivot tables are. To say like, yes, like I want you to come join my team eventually. And I want you to know that, when you're in these type of awesome early stage roles like BDRs or early stage CSMs, SMBAEs, even early stage marketing, it's like you have a lot of different paths that you can go within the startups. I think one that often gets forgotten about is RevOps. And I think I'm very passionate about hiring people into my org that have had experience like walking a day in the shoes of the teams that we support. And as such, it's like it's a two-way street though, where if you're someone who's early stage in your career who's saying, hey, I'm really curious about what RevOps as a career path looks like, go meet with your RevOps and go talk to them. This was literally 15 years ago chatting with Don Alphos about, help me do a Salesforce report. There's a laundry list of projects that I think every RevOps team has in a backlog somewhere that they're like, man, I will probably never get to these, but if we ever do one day, here's an opportunity. At least we got them documented. I've had BDRs come help me with like some data cleanup stuff that like expose them to parts of this role that I think they wouldn't have been exposed to otherwise. And it's an awesome thing for the RevOps team to feel like you've got advocates outside of our team who can help you on things. But, the rule, of course, is like, hey, you got your day job. Like helping us with special projects is not going to pay your rent. Like you got to go be good at what you're here to do. But I think those types of folks that branch out and say, hey, I'm really curious in like helping out with a special project. I've never heard of a RevOps person who would say no to some sort of thing like that. And I think at least for someone early on, it will give you exposure to what this type of role is. And I can say personally for me in the early days, like having kind of been doing ops stuff and, BDR AE stuff at the same time, like it should become pretty clear. It's like, hey, is this something that you want to explore further? And if so, there's usually, my opinion is like, if I'm looking for someone to hire into my team, if there's someone internally who is excited about it, who knows our business, knows our tech stack, knows our process, that person's immediately got a leg up over someone maybe from outside the company who's got, maybe a head start on years of experience doing this specific type of role because, like I said, that was me one day, not long ago.
Yeah.
So I think that there's a lot of opportunity and not enough of it, honestly, about like promotions internally in RevOps. So
Absolutely. I agree. And that's a hopeful note to end on. Alex, thank you so much for taking the time. We're going to link to your LinkedIn in the show notes, of course, and folks can reach out to Alex if they have any questions or want to connect further. But thanks again so much for your time. I really appreciate you sharing your story.
Yeah, this is great, Kevin. Thanks for having me.